Indiana football took a massive step forward in 2024. Can the Hoosiers be another surprise team in 2025 and reach the college football playoff?
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal scoop. I'm your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We'll be talking Indiana Hoosiers coming off their captivating 2024 season. Curt Cignetti and his crew went all the way to the college football playoff, a historical run for Indiana football. Can they do it again? What would have to happen? How has recruiting changed? What's the overview of Bloomington like now compared to what it is most years? Headed into football season, the vibe's got to be different, right? Talk a little recruiting and Big Ten overall. To help me get all of that done, Mike Nizilik, brother, you live in the greater Bloomington area. You work for the Herald Times in Bloomington. Have you ever experienced anything like last year with the Indiana football program, like out of the blue? Because, I mean, everybody expected them to be a little better last year. But like I told you before the show, did anybody see undefeated prior to the Ohio State game? Did any vibe like that before the season got rolling?
Yeah, in my past, I've covered, covered Auburn before, where, it was the opposite end of the spectrum, where they were disappointing and sort of shocked everybody, in terms of that. I've never covered a team where I think that, even the best case scenarios, even before the season, I had them, like 8 wins, I thought was realistic in a bowl game, just the way they elevated the talent level on the team. But I mean, in terms of, going 10-0, never trailing until that Michigan, State game, that was I don't think on anybody's radar in terms of how dominant they were throughout that run. And then obviously making the college football playoff, certainly I think caught everybody off guard in terms of just, look, they were among the handful of undefeated teams by week 11 when they went to that Ohio State game. So that was not on the radar, but I did think that they were going to probably be, I didn't have them second to last in the Big Ten, like I think in the preseason poll last year they were, but still blew past even the wildest expectations. I think I would agree with.
Yeah, and I thought it was kind of good for college football. We see basically the same teams at the top echelon of the sport year in and year out. There's about 20 schools and about 10 of them rotate the top 10. That's just kind of how it works. And then every now and then there's something. And it was Indiana's turn. For this season, you finished this question for me. For the opportunity for Indiana to be a quote-unquote college football playoff contender again, they have to do what?
Well, I just think, keep it rolling. I mean, look, they've been really successful at evaluating the transfer portal in terms of Curt Cignetti's staff. And I think that, getting those evaluations right and being on point again, Fernando Mendoza, obviously at quarterback's kind of going to be the key. But I mean, they've tried to reload. They got Roman Hemby, a running back out of Maryland, who I think is going to be really critical to what they want to try to do. They added 2 defensive ends in the transfer portal in the spring window. Like all those guys getting the same kind of production that they got from the guys that they're replacing. A lot of those guys were James Madison guys that were very successful under Curt Cignetti. Just what they've been able to do out of the transfer portal. Their hit rate was so high last year, and even bringing up guys from the lower level, non-power 4 guys. I think that's why they were so successful this year. I think by and large, a few more power 4 guys in that mix. All the guys I mentioned are, well, except one of the defensive ends, Stephen Daly is from Kent State, but Hemby from Maryland, obviously Mendoza's from Cal. Having those guys hit the ground running and be as successful, I think will be key, because they got a great foundation on defense. They're bringing back an All-American at every level. On offense, you got Elijah Surratt, you got some really good offensive linemen up front. So that there was a much bigger base here than there was, a year ago when Curt Cignetti took over. But I still think they need to, the transfer portal sort of drives a lot of success when you're trying to reload and keep sustained success, especially when you're a team that, it doesn't have a ton of depth just because, you're taking over a roster. You're talking about a year ago when Cignetti took over, there was only like 45 scholarship players on roster. So hard to build depth immediately. So you're kind of reloading on the transfer portal, when you're a coach taking over for the first couple of years.
Yeah, they did a great job of using guys they knew. I equate it to they just combined rosters. Now, it's called a transfer, but there's the guys they already knew, they'd already coached. So there wasn't the acclimation process, and it was brilliant. I'm surprised more coaches haven't had more success with it, but Indiana maximized it. It was like 13 guys or something like that they brought over from the old team, and it worked. They're not going to have that this year, but you brought up something else that's interesting. They got a few more guys from the P4 level. Indiana became more viable in the portal. It's cool to go to Indiana now. And I cover recruiting on the Portal podcast. Indiana's name comes up more with recruits now. I'm guessing that you're noticing that, and they've got a little bit more of an influx of talent in the freshman group, etc. Do you think the college football playoff run is going to help Indiana elevate at least 2-3 years? Like, what do you get the vibe and what's the sense for the staff in general there?
Yeah, there's two levels to that, right? Because like high school, it takes time for you to see the results of it. Sure. So now, like Curt Cignetti said, last year, they were just, preaching kind of like a hope and a prayer, and now they have the actual tangible success to sort of pitch to high school guys. So this next cycle and the cycle beyond that is sort of when you're seeing kind of the impact of that success. I think you've seen sort of the, it's not all rankings, but I mean, based on rankings, you're seeing them in the mix for a lot more, top 750, top 500 guys, as opposed to last year when they were taking more, flyers on projects, guys that were sort of overlooked. So I think that's sort of out there, and in the future, like you're seeing them steadily climb, the ranks a little bit and getting a higher profile of player. In terms of the transfer portal, I think their success using their offensive weapons, I think his success with quarterbacks, I mean, you're going to get a higher caliber. Like, Pat Coogan is a guy I didn't mention, but, Notre Dame starting center, starting offensive lineman, he comes free, and Curt Cignetti calls him directly and says, look, you're my guy. I want you here. I want you to start. And they get it done right away. A couple of years ago, I don't think that happens. They're looking maybe as a project guy or backup guy, that shows more potential than production. And Cignetti's flipped that, right? He's getting productive guys out of the portal, proven guys that, maybe looking for maybe a little more money or, more of a different role. And he's sort of maximizing their talent. And the more guys you can send to the league or more guys you can have success with. I mean, you saw guys like Justin Ellison, Miles Price last year, Power 4 guys have a lot of success. They didn't make it to the NFL, but they had really successful years. And I think that resonates. And you saw him reload, like you said, with guys out of the Power 4. And I think that's only going to continue if they have another successful year, because he's a guy that just and even on defense with Brian Haynes, their defensive coordinator, they're really good at maximizing their talent. And that's going to resonate with transfers just because a lot of these guys only have 1 year left and they want to make it as successful as they can.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they will raise up a little bit on the board in terms of who they can get, both portal and the high school ranks. And if they have another successful season this year, I think that you're talking about a whole nother deal. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're getting into Big Ten football overall and that Illinois game. That's going to be an important one for the Hoosiers. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this is a one hole in one for your energy game. Let's be honest, some days on the course or off of it, you just need that little bit of extra boost to stay sharp and energized. So whether you're playing golf or you just need a pick-me-up, something like this, can help you during the day. A 5-hour energy shot can get you going. Golf is all about good times with good people, good flavors, of course, and the grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without chasing down the bev cart. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that's number 5hourenergy.com, you can use promo code LOCKEDONGolf to receive 20% off your first order. This offer is only valid through September 30th on the order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion flavored 5-hour energy shots today. Thank you once again for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. Mike Nizelek from the Herald Times in Bloomington, Indiana, talking Indiana Hoosiers. We're going to get into a couple of important points for their season. Their schedule's interesting this year, Mike. I just looked at a poll on CBS. They had Indiana towards the very bottom in terms of difficulty again, but there still are some pitfalls. They could have a struggle with Illinois, who's a team that a lot of people are high on this year. That's game 4, I believe. And Indiana's non-con, which has been discussed a lot here lately for the obvious reason with the Virginia game, is white. Do you think they have to win the Illinois game? It's at home, by the way, in Bloomington, to have a legitimate shot to at least be in the conversation for the conference championship game and, more importantly, the college football playoff in late November?
Well, it's interesting. I think they have enough on their schedule in the Big Ten to make up for a loss, right? Because you're at Iowa, you're at Oregon, and at Penn State. So, I mean, in theory, like if you lose to Illinois, you can make it back up if you win those games. Now, the flip side of that is if you lose to Illinois, it's hard to imagine you going on the road and winning a lot of those games. So, I think that the game for both teams is sort of being used as a measuring stick. I think Illinois obviously brings back a lot, bring back the quarterback, and I think it's going to be obviously in Bloomington. So I see why it would be a measuring stick for both teams. I think it's an important game for Indiana to kind of keep some momentum going. I think there's a world in which they go into Oregon 5-0, because I think the Iowa game on the road is before that. So I can envision that certainly, but I think that's kind of what they would want to be at. If you're talking about being a playoff contender. But I think their Big Ten schedule is challenging just because I said all those 3 games, Iowa, Oregon, Penn State, are on the road. And I think that's just a really tough. Last year, UCLA on the road, Michigan State on the road, weren't going to get you anything. This year, I think those games on the road will earn you some respect that they sort of lacked sort of in the playoff discussion.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if they can win one of those tough road games. Like they were competitive with Ohio State for a quarter and a half, and then they just couldn't generate any offense against them. That hurt them some, but then they rolled the table the rest of the way. And even though Michigan improved, they found a way to gut that game out, which was what Indiana always failed at. This year, I think to make the playoff, they need a marquee victory. Nothing against Illinois. It's still not name recognition, and that's at home. If they go 10-2, they need one of those games to be Penn State or, I don't know, Penn State or Oregon would obviously be great. But winning at Iowa forever, they have given fits to Ohio State and Michigan and all kinds of teams. One of those 3 games needs to be a W for the Hoosiers, in my opinion. I don't know how that's going to go. It's too far in the future, injuries and all that stuff. But the schedule is interesting. The other interesting part to me about this is how Indiana handles it from the perspective of being the hunted instead of the hunter. Nobody, I'm an Indiana grad. I didn't see last year coming. Do you think that's going to play a factor in how they do this? Because you got to change your psychology a little bit if you're Cignetti and his crew of coaches. Is that going to be a big deal, or do you think they're going to be able to handle the bullseye?
Well, I think that this is a group, we're talking about a lot of guys that were overlooked in high school, in college, even at Indiana now, feel like overlooked. Like when you look at a guy like Mikel Kamara, who led sort of the nation in quarterback pressures and didn't get sort of the publicity or attention that I think a player in the same situation at Ohio State would have. So these guys, I think, have that sort of mentality. They're looking for an edge always, and that's the mindset of their head coach. I think what helped last year, you saw them, and Curt Cignetti talked about this at Big Ten Media Days, like they were the darling of college football until they weren't, like the last 3 weeks of the season, and everybody was like sort of, insulting them and sort of, say, why are they here and do they belong? And so I think that sort of they came together. And then you saw them, look, Purdue's wasn't a very good team. But I mean, man, you talk about making a statement that needed to not just win that game, but blow them out to really prove, one last data point for the college football playoff discussion, and they annihilated them off the field. So I think you kind of saw them have that mentality and deal with sort of adversity, a couple times during that season where I think they'll be able to make the transition just because it's the same thing, right? People don't believe in us. That's what they've had a lot of these kids their whole career. So I don't think that'll be an issue, because they dealt with it at the last part of that season last year.
I agree with that. When we come back, we're going to do Big Ten predictions, discuss what Indiana's maybe surprise player will be. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. All right, Mike, the Big Ten this year, as usual, got the normal suspects at the top. Oregon, in the first year in the league last year, ran it and then got beat by Ohio State, a team they had won against in the regular season and the playoff. You got Penn State, got all these different players back, Drew Auer, et cetera. And, of course, Ohio State, Jeremiah Smith, who's the most unguardable guy in college football. Those are the main three. Indiana, Illinois, some people like definitely looking at a situation where Iowa is a team kind of sneaking up. Who are some teams that you think can possibly creep up on Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon to make a run? And is Indiana one of them?
Yeah, I think Indiana has to be in that mix because I think even, with the schedule they have that 9-10 wins should be a realistic path, to be honest. And so like you said, you get one of those games against Oregon and Penn State, then you're right there. You're right back in the sort of the playoff mix. I think Illinois, again, I think when you look at quarterback play, it's so important when you've got an experienced guy, when you've got a guy that has not only made all the throws, but sort of run into all the 2-minute situations, won games in those situations. I think Illinois has to be up there. And like that's why we keep talking about that week 4 game. I think it's going to take on a huge importance kind of as we get into the season as well. Those are probably the two that stand out to me. I think the Big Ten, the bottom of the Big Ten will be a little better this year. I don't think teams there was just quite a few teams that just sort of bottomed out. I don't think it'll be as bad at the bottom, but I'm not sure outside of those that group that you named. In terms of what's interesting in terms of Indiana's schedule with Oregon and Penn State, I do think Penn State will be the tougher of the two teams. With Oregon, sort of, there hasn't been as much questions about their quarterback. They've had like a 6-year transfer, is that right? I think both years under Dan Lanning. Obviously, have Dante Moore now. And so, that's quite a change. And so that'll be interesting to see how they kind of handle it. And is it as smooth of a thing? Throwing Bo Nix out there, who saw like everything in his college career, versus a guy that has not really taken many competitive college snaps. I think there's a huge difference. So it'll be interesting. I think Penn State's going to be a tough out, especially on the road for a team like Indiana, for anybody really, just with what they brought back.
Yeah, that Penn State or Ohio State game will be a must-watch TV. That ought to be pretty awesome. As far as the Big Ten in general, are there any teams or any players that you're just curious to see? I have one that I want to talk about, but is there somebody that you're just curious about, and especially if they play Indiana, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, the one that jumps out and got a chance to talk to both Deshaun Foster and Nico, quarterback from UCLA himself. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I don't want to butcher it, but there you go. I'll let you do it. And so that has Indiana ties too, because they hired Indiana's quarterback coach as their new offensive coordinator, and so they're sort of on a collision course. Obviously, that UCLA game in week 3 for Indiana last year was sort of like their arrival. The idea that this team might be able to compete a little bit against teams that they thought would struggle with, and so now UCLA comes to Bloomington. They have Tino Sansari as their offensive coordinator. They got a quarterback that everybody sort of has their eyes on, obviously because of his exit from Tennessee. That's the one that probably I think I'm intrigued by, just because of what Tino did with under Curt Cignetti with the quarterbacks they had the last 3 years, kind of one transfer guys, one and dones, and the success he had. Does he do that with Nico at UCLA? And does he cost Indiana a shot at the playoff? That's going to have sort of huge implications here. And just I think there is some intrigue over UCLA in general, just about because I thought they were going to be in for some pain after they lost that Indiana game and how badly they lost it. But they actually kind of rebounded by the end of the year, and Deshaun Foster put some things together. And so can he kind of keep that momentum going? And obviously rebuilt that offense sort of from the ground up. And that's sort of one that I find just an interesting matchup kind of down the road.
I hadn't thought much about it, but you're right. Sansari, I mean, he knows they're probably going to change signals and all kinds of stuff because that's the nature of the beast.
Right.
Obviously, especially if you're playing a team from Ann Arbor, but that's another story. The point is still the same, though. You got a guy that was on your staff last year going to UCLA, you play him, and then you got the whole Nico saga. I've covered about everything in recruiting in the portal, but there's never been anything quite like the Nico deal. That was pretty wild. So that's a really interesting game. As for the playoff, how many teams do you think the Big Ten will get? You think it'll be 3? Do you think it'll be more? I think Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, pretty likely.
Yeah, I think anything. Yeah, I think the Big Ten would be disappointed with anything less than 4, to be honest, and especially with their argument that they deserve the 4 automatic qualifiers. Like you want to show, right? Like you want to show that that's why, right? You're doing it on an annual basis, and so I think anything less than 4 would probably be a disappointment to them. And like what you said was sort of like the difficulty at the top. Like, if you got a team that's beating Ohio State or beating a Penn State, they probably deserve to be in a mix if they're handling their business elsewhere. And that's why Indiana, they handled everything except Ohio State, but had a body of work that was really impressive. And so you want a team like that to be in there, I think, along with that group of blue bloods or perennial contenders. Obviously Michigan was among that group, a year before, but can they get back into it? But I think you want 4 at a minimum, just because your whole playoff argument is that we deserve 4 teams on an annual basis. So you got to get 4 teams in on an annual basis, right? And this is obviously the kind of, as they're deciding kind of the future format of the playoffs here after the season. I think you want that fresh on people's mind, and you don't want it to leave it open like, hey, why do you deserve a 4th team every year if you can't get one in, right? And so I think that'll be really important for the conference as a whole to sort of have that at a minimum.
I would agree. And I'm going to go out on a limb, and I don't know what's going to happen, but if the Big Ten and the SEC both have 3, they're just kind of obvious, and they both have one that's maybe, you talk about a lot of political shots and trying to do things in the media as we go down the stretch. That'll be pretty, how the coaches and Mike, so all these different guys that are associated with both leagues, that'll be fun to kind of follow. Last thing, the Big Ten has been rumored with Florida State. It's been rumored with, obviously, Virginia, North Carolina, etc. The latest thing, though, is North Carolina, possibly in the SEC. Virginia, again, brought up with the Big Ten. Do you think there's going to be anything before the next couple of years? Or is this just going to all be little things that get thrown out? Because I didn't think we were going to hear anything for a while after the ACC said, oh, okay, we're good. They've re-upped. And then this thing came out about North Carolina again. And I'm like, okay, this is odd, because I thought the Big Ten would want Carolina. Well, obviously the basketball brand for UNC is just massive. Always has Jordan brand, all that stuff associated. Do you think they're really going to make a play for them? And maybe this is UNC just playing their cards because it's the SEC versus Big Ten. Let's not kid ourselves. It's the Power 2 plus. There's 2 leagues that are different than the other 2.
Sure.
Do you think the Big Ten's really after Carolina or not? What's your take on that?
No, I think that I don't know that what the appetite is at the conference level right now for expansion. I think that the priorities, there's too many things going on right now that need to be settled. I think the college football playoff is sort of at the forefront of everything. And until you have that sort of settled, I don't really see the need for it, or B, the sort of what it gets you to, expand in this moment. I think that you need to kind of figure out the future of college football. You're trying to obviously still kind of get through revenue sharing and everything like that. And what these TV contracts look like. A lot of these have been settled now, and how much value does a North Carolina add to your TV contract? I don't know what that argument is to make, to be honest, right now. I mean, obviously got Bill Belichick, but he's not going to, I mean, age-wise, I mean, what's realistic? He's there for less than 5 years. I mean, like 5 years at a like great, best case scenario.
100%.
And so like, what is the value in that? And so, and from North Carolina's perspective, I don't know. I mean, I saw the tweet about it in terms of the exit fee numbers. They go down significantly every year, but right now, I mean, they're astronomical, and you can't make that back up in just 1 year of a TV contract. It take years, and so I think it's going to be probably down the line when you're talking about expansion and when they've got a kind of clear cut what the future of the college football playoffs looks like, how revenue sharing shakes out, and all of that. And then the next round of TV contracts is when you try to add value, what teams bring the most to the conference. So, just at the moment, I just don't see for either side what the benefit is. I mean, I know UNC, there's obviously attention now, but I mean, that could change next year if Bill Belichick decides he wants to go back to the NFL, or even a couple years, because he's not young, right? He's not long term. He's just not going to be there for 10 years. And so No, I didn't really get that discussion. Understand it from either side, just because, like I said, the money's so big on UNC side, and there's so much uncertainty on other stuff that the Big Ten. Tony Petitti, was at the podium in Vegas, and it was college football playoff. That was it, right? That was what he spent the large majority of time he talked about. And so I think that's kind of what's on their mind now, because they want to secure. That's kind of key to securing the future of the conference and securing kind of your place in college football. If you get those 4 automatic qualifiers every year, you're at the top. And I think they want to lock that in. And I think that's what their focus is on right now.
I really wouldn't blame them for it. If the Big Ten and the SEC, for that matter, knew more what the structure was going to be there, it'd make it a little bit easier. But the Big Ten been known more for basketball, and UNC is a part of that. But the last year, the SEC, obviously their basketball run was absolutely crazy. And of course, Florida cut down the net. So that's a part of it too. And conference expansion is never really going to be something that goes away. That's kind of part of the DNA of NCAA athletics as it is. But Mike, tell everybody where they can find your work, my friend.
Yeah, heraldtimes.com, at Michael Nizilik on X, and always welcome comments, and I hope you guys follow the work through the season. It should be a good one.
Appreciate it, Mike. You can find the Portal Podcast wherever you get your pods, Podbean, Apple, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. Please download and subscribe. We will see you again soon on the Portal Podcast.